Hi, Brian. Thanks so much. I'm really looking forward to some of the other upcoming events that you shared. So you'll see me at some of those as well. And hi, everyone. It's great to be here today. I have really been looking forward to this event to dive into the topic around the challenges of the modern CMS. In this talk today, I'm going to be diving into the questions around what are some of the common challenges around or with content-driven architecture, and then also to how to create a system that balances both flexibility and also productivity, as I find that these are often two of the biggest challenges that we face, especially as developers. Oftentimes between flexibility and productivity, there's some friction when we are thinking about content-driven architecture, and also to working with content editors. For those, I know Brian already introduced me, but a little overview. My name's Tiffany, but you can call me Tiff. A bit about myself. I am a forever learner, a very curious person, which oftentimes can get me into a bit of trouble. And I absolutely love dogs. Actually, if I go back a slide, that is my dog, Dirty Harry. He's named after Clint Eastwood. And I also have a little wiener dog named Mr. Muggs. And I'm sharing this with you because it's almost like a forewarning, because throughout this presentation, you will see a lot of dogs. So just as a little heads up. On the side, I have built a technical community called Tiff and Tech, which reaches millions of people every month. And I try not think about the numbers too much because it can become a little mind-blowing if you start thinking about it too much. But on these social platforms, I really share advice on how to grow a career in tech, my personal career journey in tech very authentically, my highs, but also my lows, also with various coding tutorials and how-to videos. And then, as Brian mentioned as well, I work at StackBit. I'm a developer advocate at StackBit, where I focus on building and educating the developer community through live videos, recorded videos, or really any form of content that best supports developers. And prior to starting at StackBit, I was a software developer for the past 5 years. I've worked at both small startup companies and then also to large companies. So I won't dive too deep into StackBit at this point, but to give more of an overview of what StackBit is, we provide an environment that allows for us as developers to be able to continue to work with any tech stack that we want. So we can retain full control over our code, while also to our content editors or marketers, they can work in their preferred environment in a visual editor that's very user-friendly, easy to use. And then designers can work in their preferred environment. So I like to sum it up as everyone can work how they want in the best of all worlds. And I'll get into a bit more of this in the demo at the end, but that's a little bit of what StackBit is. Let's get into the history of CMSs. I decided when I was thinking about this talk today, I decided to first take a step back and really understand the history and some of the challenges faced around CMSs over the years. And my reasoning to do that was because really when I'm learning anything technical or non-technical, for me, to gain a solid understanding of it, the best way to do that is to understand a little bit of background on it, because that way it really helps us be able to understand why decisions were made, different challenges faced along the way, and it's a really great way to do that. And in total transparency, I started at StackBit about 4 months ago, so I'm still pretty new to the world of headless. I quickly realized that as I was diving into it, that there are so many different challenges in this world, alongside a lot of the benefits, and it's just a forever learning process. When we think of early content management systems, they were at the time game changers for developers. Think about before content management systems came along. Developers would need to write HTML for essentially each piece of content for the web. The traditional CMS, also known as monolithic applications, started to become popular around 2003. Now, I'm sure you all are very familiar, maybe some are too familiar with this logo here. A popular one that we are all very familiar with is WordPress. WordPress at the time, though, and still today, but initially it allowed for content editors and developers to work better together, and for developers to enable content editors to be able to build out content much more efficiently. Shortly after, full stack frameworks really started to come onto the scene, from Ruby on Rails, Django, Symfony, and many others. At the time, this was a pivotal moment for developers and also for content management systems. It allowed for developers to be able to be more efficient and also streamline web development. They were able to create functional web applications with minimal setup and also quicker configuration, focusing on being able to build out features rather than focusing on boilerplate code. Also, as a side note before I move on, every time I see the Symphony logo, I have to take a step back and chuckle to myself. When I was first learning how to code, I went to a coding boot camp, and this is many, many years ago. And at the time, I was learning all the quote unquote sexy technologies. So, React, JavaScript, Node, MongoDB. And I was like, this is great. I'm loving this. Fast forward to my first developer job, it was in PHP and Symfony, and I was like, this is extraordinarily different than what I initially learned. And then you see online all the challenges, we should say, that it can bring, but I actually grew to really enjoy it. But just wanted to share that funny story with you. Fast forward a bit more, in 2008, Google released the V8 JavaScript engine, which really put JavaScript further in the spotlight and made it possible to execute the language with high performance in the browser. V8, as I'm sure many of us know on here, was designed to be fast, and it introduced a number of optimizations that made it even faster than previous JavaScript engines. This made it possible for us to build more complex and sophisticated web applications without having to sacrifice performance. Oops. Fast forward to around 2013, around this time, we really started to see JavaScript frameworks and libraries pop up. These frameworks from Angular, React made it easier for developers to build single-page applications and also to be able to handle dynamic content on the front end. It was around this time we started to see the shift for headless CMSs to start to gain more popularity. I really love this photo of this dog. I think this dog sums up how I feel most Friday afternoons, if I'm being totally candid, just like I need the weekend to come. At this time, though, as modern JavaScript frameworks were gaining popularity, developers, of course, wanted to use them and build web applications with them. These are new technologies or newer technologies coming out. They wanted to start utilizing them. However, because of this, it caused a lot of friction with traditional monolithic CMSs, which made it difficult to support these frameworks. Not to mention, some other pitfalls were continuing to appear with monolithic CMSs. Now let's dive into some of the downsides of the monolithic CMS. Okay, maybe downsides isn't the right word. Maybe we should let's call it challenges. Let's remain optimistic and just say challenges. The first being scalability issues. Monolithic CMSs can be resource intensive, and they may not scale well as the size of a website or number of users continues to increase. Not to mention cost. It can be super expensive to scale. For example, let's think of the cost of a headless CMS. They are affected typically by increases in content volume more than monoliths, which typically tend to be more affected by increases in traffic. Another challenge with the monolithic CMS is around upgrade and migration. Upgrading or migrating a monolithic CMS can be time-consuming and a pretty risky process. It often requires significant changes to the underlying infrastructure. For example, let's say, what is a good example? Let's say there is a company that is using an outdated version of a CMS for their website. And the company decides to upgrade to the latest and greatest version of this CMS. But the upgrade process requires significant changes to the underlying infrastructure. Think of things including updating the server environment, the database schema, and other dependencies. There's a possibility, probably a large possibility, that something along this process could go wrong, causing the website to go offline or experience other issues. Not to mention that the amount of time the company will need to invest in resources and energy for testing and verifying that this upgrade was successful. A third challenge that I want to share with you today is dependency on a single vendor. Monolithic CMSs, when we think of them, they're typically developed and maintained by a single vendor, which can make it difficult to switch to a different system or to access support and updates. This is often because of the way they've chosen to do something, whether it be a specific language they have chosen or their APIs might be super opinionated. Naturally, as these challenges started to come up and become more recognized, the paradigm started to shift. As the shift was taking place around this time, the end users' wants and needs were changing too. A good way to summarize this is to take a step back and understand what is meant by omni-channel. As I mentioned earlier in this presentation, I am still, all considering pretty new to the world of headless CMSs. And one of the words when I first started that I kept on hearing about was omni-channel, omni-channel, omni-channel. And I'm thinking, what is this word omni-channel? What really does it mean? So I took a step back and I searched up what does omni mean? So the root word omni means all things in Latin. And when you really think about it, that's how content should be delivered nowadays. All available channels must be supported to ensure success. That's why we needed better solutions, ones like decoupled headless CMSs that are agile enough to be able to keep up with new mediums and technologies as they continue to arise. I love this picture of this dog too. I wonder, it must be Photoshopped. There's no way dogs can be, it has to be Photoshopped. But a little part of me likes to think that maybe it's actually this flexible. But to support omni-channel content delivery, it is necessary to have a content management system that is both agile and flexible. Enter the world of headless. I'm going to share one quick story with you here about this image. It just always makes me laugh. So when I first started at StackBit, I got sent a welcome package. And in the welcome package was a lot of the typical things you would expect. T-shirts, hats, I think notebook, that kind of stuff. But then there was also this Lego set, quite a big Lego set with no context. Like, why was I receiving this Lego set? And it should have been kind of like a forewarning because I quickly realized that at StackBit, a lot of my colleagues are huge Lego fans. Actually, we went to the Jamstack conference and the giveaway prize was a Lego. So there's this underlying theme of Legos, and I've actually converted. I used to be a puzzle person to now I'm more on the Lego team. So we're going to get into some of the challenges and how to overcome these challenges with a headless CMS. But before we do, let's also talk a little bit about some of the benefits that a headless CMS brings to us. The first one that is probably one of the more obvious ones is flexibility. As developers, when we are using a headless CMS, we have our choice of technologies we want to use for front end, such as React, Angular, Vue, whatever framework we want, we can continue to choose that. Another big benefit of headless CMSs is separation of concerns. With a headless CMS, the content management and presentation layer, they are decoupled, meaning you can focus on creating and managing content without worrying about the presentation aspect. This can also make it easier to manage and update your content. And a third one being scalability. A headless CMS is designed to handle large amounts of data and content traffic. It can scale easily to meet the needs of your growing business. And also, too, taking a step back, I think another benefit of scalability is that you don't really need to worry about it, meaning it will continue to scale. However, you might have to take into consideration the pricing as you scale, which is a big challenge, I would say. Speaking of challenge, let's dive into some of the challenges around a headless CMS. One being lack of defined structure. With all the freedom and benefits that a headless CMS brings, it also brings little definition in how we should structure pages and components. Developers must build their own front end for displaying content, and with that freedom, they must also figure out how to properly retrieve and display content from the CMS on their own. Now, this typically isn't the challenging part. This part is typically pretty straightforward, but where the challenging part really comes in is the lack of defined structure. How, without limitations, how do we know the best way to structure our content? And how can we ensure that how we structure it today will be the best way to have structured it years from now as we continue to scale? Lack of defined structure can make it harder to ensure that the front end is consistent and also easy to use for content editors. With a traditional CMS, if we think about going back to a traditional CMS, the front end is typically designed with the needs of content editors in mind. For example, there's often tools and templates that is provided to them to help them create and organize their content in a logical and intuitive way. Another challenge that we face with headless CMSs is the responsibility for building the front end now falls on to developers who may not have the same understanding of the needs and wants of content editors. This can lead to a front end that is more difficult for content editors to use and in turn lead to issues with content creation and other organizational issues. Now, another challenge around headless CMSs, and I know it's not a fun challenge to talk about, is cost. Now, give me a second here. I need some water. Is around cost though. And I know it's not necessarily the funnest topic to talk about cost and money around this, but the reality is that's how a lot of decisions are still made today. Many headless CMSs have pricing that is based on the number of content types, API requests, and team members. Now, of course, this varies from company to company, but those are the three main ones that we see. So I wanted to dive into a little bit more around the cost for these three types, just going back to the reality of the decision making being so oftentimes tightly wound to the pricing. So for content types with headless CMSs, they typically charge on based on the number of content types that are created in the system. So a content type is a blueprint, you can think of it as, for a specific type of content, such as an article or a product, and each content type counts towards the total number of each content, sorry, counts towards the total number of content types. Another way they charge us is through API requests. So, based on the number of API requests that are made to the platform, and this can get expensive pretty quickly. And the third way is team members. There are different pricing plans based on the number of team members that need to access the platform. The cost per team member increases as the number of team members increase. And as we continue to grow, that can get expensive quickly as well. Another challenge that we often face is real-time preview lost. When we think of for content editors, when we think of content editors, the ability to preview content in real time is one of the most important aspects in the content creation process, or maybe not one of the most important, but it definitely is up there. It allows for them to be able to see how their changes will look on the front end of a website or application before the content is actually published. Without real-time preview, content editors would have to rely on other methods, such as manually checking the website or other workarounds to see exactly how their changes would look. And this, of course, can be time-consuming and also just plain out frustrating. It can lead to errors and inconsistencies. You know, this makes me think of a little story here. At my last job I was at, the last project I was working on was an Angular project. It was an Angular project for quite a big international airline. And, you know, we'd be working on quite large features during our sprint, heads down, focused, making good progress. You know, when you get into the zone, when you're building a feature, it's the best. Only to have the design team or the content editors ping you and go, hey, we need some text changed on screen like yesterday. I made a ticket for it here. And it's like, yes, it only takes a few minutes to do. It's a quick process, but the getting out of your workflow to make these changes for content editors that are so small, it does, when you think about all the time that really takes up, is quite large. Another example is when content editors are working on blogs. So, say they are going to be creating a new blog post for a company's site. Without real time preview, without that feature, you could say, the content editor would have to manually check the website after making each change to see how the post looks. So, once again, this might simply just be flipping between screens, but that takes time and it leads to so much potential for inconsistencies, errors to occur along the way. And I really gave two examples there to really hone in on this because this is a huge challenge that we face. And with the loss of real time preview, the demand for modular and flexible editing experiences, i.e., site builders, has continued to grow, making both of these problems more difficult to solve. I love this picture of the dog because this is how I felt as I was first diving into the world of headless. Like, is it even possible to solve these challenges? How can we? Well, it is possible. One of the biggest ways to really start solving this problem is you need to know your content editors. Flexibility and productivity. We go back to this. This was a question that I wanted to answer at the beginning of this talk. And it's because knowing your content editors is so important to understand how flexible you should structure your CMS versus how productive it should be. So, what makes content flexible? What does that even really mean? Well, more flexibility means content editors have more control over specific type of content that they can edit. So, when we think of the ultimate flexibility, it would essentially include the content editor writing code. Think of them having a blank field in which they could write HTML and CSS to build up the page. But this doesn't equate to the ultimate productivity in where they actually should be spending their time. Flexibility does not equal productivity. The content editors shouldn't be spending the majority of their time building pages from scratch, but rather they should be able to utilize structured templates to build quickly and efficiently. So, then on the flip side of things, what exactly makes content productive? Productivity can be thought of as giving content editors the ultimate packages of templates and reusable content. They can build pages quickly and efficiently through predefined content. Oftentimes, if we think at the extreme end of productivity, comes the lack, though, of flexibility to modify content. For example, a good example of this is, say, if the fields are hard coded to mark up on the front end, content editors may not have the ability to move sections around. So it's that friction still we're facing. So, can we have the best of both worlds? This slide, every time I get to it, always makes me think this is my dream office. Just replace humans with dogs for my everyone, and we're good to go. In order to find balance in the best of both worlds, there needs to be a system in place that stands on both how we develop the model and code, how they're designed and developed, and then also to how the editing environment should work. I really like this diagram here on screen as it's a good visual representation of how modeling and coding are affected. When we think around modeling and coding, we need to design our pages to be easily composable by creating a model that allows editors to build pages using various types of sections that can be stacked and rearranged as desired. These sections should be reusable between page layouts, but also too, components within these sections need to be reusable as well. This approach for flexibility and efficiency in creating organization for the pages will help allow to have what's the word? I guess both being reusable and also structured. I want to share one more diagram here and then we will get into the demo. To make your components more flexible and adaptable, you can design them to dynamically resolve the actual component from the content versus only allowing hard coded child components. Now, rather than me just talking about it here, let's get into sharing my screen and going into a bit of the demo. Brian, I'll switch to my screen here if you don't mind. Perfect. All right. So as you can see here, I have a Next.js project on screen, and I'm keeping up with the theme of this talk, so I called it Dog App. And to start with, let's just run this to see what the project actually looks like here. Okay, so dogs rule the world. This is a very basic page we have where there's two components. So we have our header component, or our hero component, I should say, and then we also have our card grid component down here. Now, if I go back into VS Code, the content, I have a markdown file here, which it has all the content inside of it. And under sections in type, we are referencing each component. So we have the hero section, and then in the hero section, you can see the content, the heading, subheading, etc. And then we also have the type of, or the component, I should say, of card grid section. So two components here. Now I'm going to keep both of these files open instead of giving you a headache by flipping back and forth too much. So in this file here, in our slug, if I scroll down, you can see, I just want to quickly highlight, we have two utility functions here. We have pages by type, which essentially with Next.js, we have to tell it what all the pages are. So we run this function. And then we also have URL to content, which will give us all the properties for this page. But that's not where I want to spend the majority of our time here. Let me scroll up again to the top here for flexible page. So you can see this is a very simple, we have a title here, and then we also have a div here. And inside of this div, we are mapping over page.sections, sections coming from the markdown file here. And what I did was this components map, I made it up here, and I'm passing into this object the hero section and also to the card grid section. So you can see here, we are rendering these components all from flexible page. And a good thing to do is let's actually create another component, and I'll show you kind of the workflow for this. So let's create a component called testimonials. This is where the spelling comes in, the spelling challenge. Testimonials section. Perfect. All right, and I actually, to save some time, have the code here. Let me copy this. Perfect. So just created a component. Now we can import our content into the markup file, or put our content into the markup file. Let's scroll down a bit here. And put our type, which is the component testimonial section, and also some body and an author. Perfect. All right. So now then if we go back into Slug.js, we can simply just import that testimonial section that we created. Here, let me close this for more room. And I'm just going to copy, less chance of spelling errors, even though it's a rare occurrence that there won't be one. All right, and put it here. There we go. Now, if we go back into our local host, we can see here we have a testimonials section. Now, this solves, actually, let me go back to localhost. So this solves one issue for the development side of things. We are now structuring our code in a way that's very reusable. If other developers are to come in, it's very readable, but there's still a missing part here that for the content editors, if they were to come in, they would still face the issue of not being able to edit content right directly in a visual editor. They still have to flip screens, whether it be from headless CMS or in this case, using a markdown file, which would probably result in them having to make tickets for developers to go in and edit. So this is really where StackBit comes in. Prior to starting this project, or sharing this project with you, I did two things. One thing is I created this configuration file here. Let me close some of these now. I created this configuration file here. which is a pretty simple configuration file. I'm importing different models. Let's go to hero section. And we can see here it's defining hero section, and we're doing that for all of our different sections. Now, if I scroll down in the config, we're also letting them know about the stack bit version, different versions, and also passing in the models. So it's pretty simple configuration file. And I also installed StackBit prior to this. So now what I can do is simply run StackBit dev, and this will share with us a URL that we can open. And it's still running locally, local development, as you can see. But you can see now, this looks so different already from just the page before with localhost. And it's because StackBit gives a lot of tools to content editors right out of the gate. So for example, let's do a change here. Dogs rule the world. Let's go into page, dogs rule the world section, and let's do forever. Just a silly text change kind of thing. And this will enable two-way sync. So we can see here on screen the change that occurred. And then if I go back into our markdown file, scroll up, we can see that the two-way sync has been reflected. So this is just a snippet, I would say, of the power of StackBit. And this is an example with a markdown using markdown files, but this could be really with any headless CMS. And it really allows for, it's that missing link in the challenges that I spoke about today for both finding ways to structure code that is best suited for developers and being able to work in your preferred environment, but also to then allowing your content editors to take control and have the freedom and flexibility to create pages, build on their own, and I guess allowing developers at the end of the day to continue to focus on larger problems. All right, that is my demo, Brian. I know I'm sharing my screen still, so I'll either go back to my slides or open it up for Q&A.
Okay, that was great. Thank you so much. So I'll go ahead and remove these slides here since it's just thank you. That was really good. I think we did have one question from the audience, but if anybody has additional questions, we've got some time here, and we can open it up to more questions. One of the things that came to mind for me is, it has been. So I worked with a lot of marketing departments, and they tended to we wanted to move to a headless CMS. Oftentimes, this was driven largely by the development team and less so by the marketing team. Um, if you're thinking about how you would position this, to try and sell your marketing team on why they should do this, make this change, what would be the key benefits you'd pitch them on in terms of moving headless? Because I found that's often the hard part. The developers see the obvious benefits to how they build applications, but the marketing or whoever is managing the content doesn't immediately see the benefits of using a headless CMS.
Yeah, that's a great question, Brian. And I think too, it's one of those challenges that are faced around, as you mentioned, developers see the immediate benefits, of course, with working with headless, but a lot of times for content creators, even as I was sharing in the presentation, with a traditional CMS, it sometimes is more, they're providing tools right out of the gate for content editors, tools and different templates. Whereas headless CMSs, it goes back to, okay, so now the content editor or marketer needs to get familiarized with going into a headless CMS, working with content in this way. So I think it goes back to, there is no perfect answer. I mean, the answer that comes to my mind, the obvious answer that comes to my mind is having something in place like a visual editor, like a StackBit. And this literally isn't me trying to, say, StackBit is the way to go, but it's there for a reason. It's a huge solution to this problem as far as finding that way that everyone can work still in their preferred way.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that especially because most cases what they had prior what did allow them direct editing and previewing experience, which is always a struggle with a headless CMS. Obviously in this case, I guess we're only really referring to the web application part because the idea of a headless CMS is also like you said that we can now I can reuse that content in a mobile app or
Mhm.
in whatever any different thing. I mean, theoretically, even like a voice chat app and things like that, if it's like Q&A type information. Um, and do you I mean, do you feel like I guess this is more of like a general question. Obviously, you're somewhat new to headless CMS, but like, do you feel that people are actually taking advantage of that? I mean, is it primarily because that's where I've often like I've seen it, and it's always talked about in terms of websites. Do you feel that in your experience, companies are actually reusing this content across multiple platforms, or is it just like ideally we can, we're not, but we can?
Mhm. That's a great question. I think from my experience, I don't think a lot of companies are utilizing it across as many various platforms as they can. I think it's more we live in this ideally we can world. Um, you know, I think it's slowly starting to become more and more, but from what I've initially seen, it's more we're living more in that ideally we can world. And I'm not certain as to why that is. Maybe it's just one of those things that is nice to know we could. I don't know what it is. It's interesting though, but that's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, like my hazarding a guess as to why is largely because of how they're not developing the content based on content. Like it's often like we have this component it has these properties on the website, so make this content that matches those properties, as opposed to the other way around. Let's build the component based on the content that we have. Um, I at least that's how what I've seen is it's always gone like design creates a site. The developers say like they come up with like, okay, here's the pieces of content we need for this site, and that kind of limits your reusability if you do it that direction. I don't know. That's just
Yeah,
me guessing.
yeah. No, I agree.
On my
It's sorry?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say it's one of those things that a lot of times I feel we often talk about the benefits or the positives, but on a day to day, if how much we actually implement them, that's to be determined, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it is. It yeah, definitely. Um, and I think that it's just a lot of as with any tool, if you use it, if you kind of plan ahead and do it right, but if you kind of quickly like the quick way of solving is not always the optimal way, or almost never the optimal way, right?
No, it's not.
So, here's a question from the audience. I kind of took a a shot at answering it in chat, but Mike asks, how do newer JavaScript runtimes like Dino and Bun fit into the headless CMS architecture? Is it? I mean, to me, it seems like probably doesn't really matter because you build it the front end however you want. Or what do you? I mean, what do you think?
That was my first thought too. Like it's a great question, but I think it would be I would say that's maybe we could look at that as one of the benefits or positive sides about headless. It's not here to determine, for the most part, around the technologies or the front end side of things what we use. So I think that's up to us. So yeah, that's how I would kind of answer it as well. They do fit in the sense that if that's what you want to use, then we can use it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. As I would, yeah, I agree with that. I'd say that like the only thing I noted was the maybe if I recall, like some headless CMSs have like starters and or like integrations that you might miss out on if you're using something they don't have support for.
Yeah,
Like, I mean, as you know, like a lot of them have like Next.js, but if you're using Astro, I might not get, as an example of like using a newer technology, I might not get the same integrations that are pre-built. So I'd have
yeah,
to do some of that stuff manually, I guess. But
exactly. It
you
always.
can.
Oh, sorry.
I said, but you can do it manually. That's
Yeah.
the idea.
Yeah, exactly. It comes with, even with in the world of headless, we always say like you can, yes, you can, but it's one of those things where depending on which headless CMS you are working with or which you go with, there are still caveats that go along with that. And as you mentioned, maybe one is a little has better support for X, Y, and Z technology than another one. And I think that has to come into play too.